Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
Hello, innovation and technology are shaping our lives at an ever-accelerating rate. This digital revolution has been described as the new industrial revolution. I'm delighted to be joined again by Marek Suchocki from Autodesk to explore what this means for our construction industry. I spoke with Marek on a previous podcast, Building Digital Britain, in June. When we last spoke, you mentioned that the Construction Leadership Council recovery plan to deal with COVID had three phases: the restart, reset, and finally reinvent phase. So at this point now, we should be into the reinvent phase. So is the construction industry transforming and reinventing itself now?
That's a good question, because I have sort of looked back on the conversation we had and that particular report, which I was, very much in favour of. I think it was taking a kind of a moment in time that has affected us all dramatically, and using it as a way to look at ourselves as an industry and ask those questions about, have we been doing things well? Are there opportunities that we've been missing? And, what could we do differently? So I would probably say that in terms of, the reinvention, I think that's probably stretching it a little to suggest we've reinvented ourselves. But I can imagine that even you and I, having spoken, a couple of times over the last year, the fact that we've done it without any second thoughts about speaking to each other online, on a daily basis, we are back-to-backing these Zoom calls or Teams calls. We are interacting with colleagues, customers, project participants, and we're not really complaining that we're having to use these new tools. So to some extent, we have made a paradigm shift. There's a discussion going on whether or not people will go back to their own offices as they used to. And in some cases, they're kind of making accommodations to say, we're going to partly work at home and partly work in the office. And this is becoming a statement from all types of organisation. Obviously, those folk who have to work on site don't really have necessarily that luxury, because you still got to build things and manage things. But I think we have made a change in the industry. Also, I think what is important is that change has leveraged technology. So the acceptance that technology is an enabler of us doing things differently, perhaps doing things better, is becoming widespread. So I was recently involved in an event for Syria, the Construction Industry Research and Information Association, and we ran a little breakout workshop asking about the barriers of procurement and design processes to using technology as an enabler of change. And I think the one conclusion that I drew from the discussion was that there are some people who still hold precious the old ways of working. My forms, my paper drawings, that there is a belief that they are in some way inherently better than digital tools. And I think that might be a generational thing, where we are trusting the things we've known, whereas others have just said, no, that wasn't better. There was more risk inherent in those approaches. And the flaws were so apparent that doing it differently is just more sensible. And I think, and this is one that I think our industry needs to embrace, is it's a way to attract new generations. We've always had issues with getting people into our industry. So if we can set ourselves up as being a fun, exciting industry, because we use, iPads on site, we're, mobile phones, we're using augmented reality, machine learning models. That's how we're going to pull young people into our sector, not by saying, you're going to have muddy boots and get shouted at all day long. That's just not how it's going to happen.
And that blend of off and on-site collaboration, do you see that changing then, in terms of, you said people still need to be in to a degree on construction sites, but can that change with technology? Can that be different in terms of being in a site? People can be there remotely and on some level?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think in some respects, Autodesk for the last sort of 5 or so years has made a really big focus on the construction site, because it perhaps has been the most open to digitalization because it has been the least digitized. So by saying that, what could we do for those people who do work on site? How can we make their life easier? How can we augment the operative, the project manager, construction lead, by giving them more information, more detail using digital tools? So the opportunities, I think, are vast actually in the construction world, and yeah, connecting the site operative with a remote worker. Even many years ago when I used to work for Atkins, and roughly sort of 20 years ago, dare I say, we were already exploring the use of like online forms, so that let's say a bridge inspection could be done in the field, and perhaps if a defect was identified, why couldn't the kind of survey folks, the people that were out there doing the inspection, why couldn't they maybe immediately contact a expert and say, look, is this an issue, by using, even then, some kind of webcam approach or, a phone camera? I mean, today this is so easy, whether we're using, WhatsApp, FaceTime, or other equivalent video messaging tools. Doesn't it make sense to just say, look, I know that there is a sort of a survey expert back in an office working for either my company or another company. Can I just get their opinion here and now? So I think we are changing the way we behave and leverage technology, because it's also part and parcel of our home lives. The home technologies have invaded the office and vice versa. It used to be the other way around more, that, we have better kit in the office, and yet now so often it's a case of people have almost better technology apparently at home than they do in the office. And so why don't we just, have this hybrid?
One of the things that Autodesk has been involved in is this embodied carbon in construction, the EC3 tool. And given Bill Gates has said buildings are bad for the climate, and the kind of combination of buildings materials, concrete and steel, produce emissions, and in fact the two materials account for about 10% of the world's annual greenhouse gases, then there's an issue of how we account for that. So I was going to ask about carbon accounting in terms of the calculations of carbon that goes into construction. So the idea of the embodied carbon in construction is quite an important concept in terms of how carbon intensive a building or construction project is. Is that something that you see kind of in the future, that, or currently, that there'll be more of that embraced by clients?
It's a huge topic for us in our wide industry sector, because the construction industry is perhaps one of the most polluting or wasteful and so damaging to the environment as a result sectors. We have a substantial proportion of every construction project is actual waste. We're talking in the order of sort of 10 to 30% of a construction project could be waste. So we have a big gap to make up, and actually that's an opportunity that we can exploit. So what's kind of required is a bit of a change in mindset, and I think that change in mindset is first acknowledgement of the problem. Because, if we just carry on as we are, then we're still going to have like skips outside house extension projects that are full of materials. We're going to have people completely ripping out existing and replacing with new, rather than perhaps replacing only the failed pieces. We're also very much a bespoke industry, so everything is done as a kind of a one-off. So we're always kind of experimenting, and yet I think it was the Bryden Wood have been doing work with the Construction Innovation Hub, and saying that really, when you look at the way, let's say, buildings are laid out, that somewhere in the order of 70% of the spacings are consistent. It doesn't matter if it's a school, an office, a prison, a hotel. A room size is consistent. So it's either could be, let's say, a 4-meter grid, an 8-meter space, or 3 meter, any of those logical spaces would work. And similarly, if you look at highways, the width of the road hasn't changed. For us, it's sort of roughly 3.75 meters as a carriageway or something like that. Well, let's use that as a standard way. Why don't we fit components into that spacing? So we always know that things will go in there, and then we can minimize, therefore, the waste on site, because things that we deliver, prefabricated potentially, will already be within that dimensional range. So we're kind of missing a few tricks, because we probably blame the process, saying, well, you can't lay concrete consistently because it's a fluid, and similarly, blacktop. But actually you could, we could just change the approach, and then suddenly we're no longer creating a lot of waste on site. We're, optimizing the materials. And again, the materials could change. I've seen some really lovely examples of people looking at reusing plastic waste, and within the construction process, there's a UK company that are producing curbs from recycled bottle tops, things that are really hard to actually recycle, and they're creating hollow curbs which can allow water to flow down them. So effectively we've got a built-in drainage solution. Or they're also now looking at repurposing that for potentially electric car charging points, because we're looking to go to minimize the carbon impact by adopting electric cars. But where are you going to charge these things? Not everybody has the luxury of a garden, front garden with a place where you could park your vehicle. But wouldn't it be nice if actually most curb locations could have a point at which you could plug in, pay by credit card or some other method, but it doesn't have to be outside your house, because, if you live in a city, if you live in a flat, you don't have that option. So you're kind of blending, two approaches, even in that very simple example of saying, let's go to electric cars, but you need the infrastructure to support it. And it could be part of our highway infrastructure, but that at the same time is leveraging a recycling philosophy. So I think a lot of this is all about rethinking the problem as opposed to reinventing the wheel as such. On another kind of related topic, Autodesk just literally a couple of weeks ago released a report with a third party, Frost & Sullivan, called Accelerating Sustainability. And this report picked out a number of factors from surveyed industry specialists where, let's say something like 47% within our industry want to simplify the capture and reporting of sustainable approaches. You mentioned capture, carbon reporting, because it's really hard to do today. So people are saying, yeah, I want to do it, but I kind of haven't because it's difficult. And actually that then also takes you towards a model-based approach, because it's ever so hard to attach a metric to a line and an arc, a pencil sketch or a CAD drawing. But if we know that this is a model object, it's a thing of set dimensions, then we can start calculating its embodied carbon at the very least. It's made of this material, which as a calculation will give us a number. So if we want to measure this stuff, then you've got to stop doing that old way. As I said, people are holding on preciously to the old ways of working, but they don't allow us to do these new things. So you do need to make that step to adopt, a new way of working if we want to start capturing and counting carbon.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Bill Gates in his blog post on the buildings are kind of not helping with climate change. His thing was that if we're actually measuring these things, particularly in the construction phase, then we start to manage them more effectively, because the kind of maintenance stuff will become easier as things become more energy efficient and you're using renewable energy to maintain them. The actual construction measurement will become more important. But you mentioned something interesting, the 10 to sort of 30% of waste. The circular economy is a concept that's been around for a while. Do you see that gaining more and more traction then as well?
Yeah. Actually, I mentioned this report. I mean, in that one again, the idea of circularity was absolutely, within this report, where we have to position ourselves within the wider built and managed environment, and the role that we play as engineers, whether we're designers or constructors, and how what we create is then used by others. We're all kind of road users, but do we think about that if we're acting as a highway engineer or a highway constructor? I kind of think sometimes we divorce ourselves because we're kind of stuck in our role. So then how can we as consumers and users either leverage or change the way that we design and manage our infrastructure? I think that's probably the thing that's coming down the line. And again, I mentioned like the generational change. Certainly younger people, I have 2 teenage daughters. For them, I think it doesn't make sense to not think about the environment in the things that they do, because they're seeing that their futures are potentially going to be negatively impacted. So yeah. I mean, that circularity is definitely something that we kind of need to insert as one of the things we consider as we do projects moving forward. It's not an afterthought. It is part of how we do our job.
And there's the kind of role in clients driving some of that in terms of what they're asking for, isn't there, in terms of both at a national strategic, particularly thinking roads level, but also at a local level. So it's supporting the industry moving in that direction. I think that's still happening. The allure of the sector is interesting. You mentioned about using machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. Do you think that that you will see an upturn in kind of attraction to the industry because of this shift to the sort of embracing technology and innovation?
Yeah, and I think again, talking about the fact that certainly there appears to be a real focus in the younger generations around the environment. Greta Thunberg, we have a lot to thank her for, because she's inspired so many young people to be passionate and active around this. Well, it's one thing to complain and moan about it and blame everybody, but there's another to say, well, I'm going to now pick up the mantle and be a person who's going to make that change, because somebody's got to make that change. It's all well and good complaining about it, but you've got to have other people doing it. So I think, the new technologies plus the real focus around the environment means that young people, if they want to make a change, they've got to get into our industry. But means coming into our industry isn't going to be coming into a challenging, let's say, adversarial space. It's going to be a fun place to work. There's so much opportunity in terms of career paths. Diversity is ever increasing. Thankfully, as I say, I've got two daughters. I'd love one of them to perhaps enter our sector and not feel in any way that they should be threatened or that this isn't for them. I think it should be for them, especially if they want to make, like, say, these changes around the environment, and you can directly impact it. And I think that's why our industry is ever so important. We are one of the most able to positively affect, as well as currently negatively affecting, our environment. And it probably won't even require huge changes. Actually, I mentioned that we've done this report with Frost and Sullivan. One of the statistics that really kind of frustrated me a little bit was that approximately 20% in the industry have completed projects using an energy model throughout the design process, with a sort of about, let's say, two in five planning to do so in the next 5 years. And I'm kind of, really, is that honestly the case, that only 1 in 5 have been doing this up to now? To me, it's a no-brainer. If you have a model, then the great beauty of having a model is that you can now repurpose that model for different perspectives, different analyses. So surely sustainable evaluation of a project has got to be front and center, and yet I think it's still done as the kind of the last process in the flow. So certainly, if we're going to bring in this circular economy, if we're going to bring in environmental considerations, carbon reduction, you've got to do that from the outset. So every step is always coming up with a number. That's one of our measures. We're still a little bit stuck in, like, the cost and time mindset. How can I build it cheaply and get it done quickly? Well, I'd rather have it done well and do the right thing. And that's probably not a huge on cost, because, is the cost to the environment less than the cost of spending a little bit more money on different material choices?
No, I think it's interesting that, not sure what the word would be, but the almost confluence or interface between sustainability and environmental considerations and technology and innovation. So the kind of sustainability environment match well when harnessing technology and innovation. So 3D modeling, off-site, on-site collaboration, advanced scheduling, all of those bits about and a common data environment, how that can all be brought together to achieve the environmental gains. How much do you see technology and innovation, and this is probably a good concluding point, but how much do you see that being harnessed to solve environment, climate questions?
Well, I kind of almost think it's the only way we're going to do it. Best endeavors isn't enough. We have to do something different. And the beauty of like a digital way of working is that we can make these assessments. We can do the count on the basic material. We can do what if scenario analyses. we can consider new ways of working, as in new processes for manufacturing the elements, or for actually assembling the facility, whatever it might be. And perhaps also, certainly when we consider it from our kind of infrastructure world, alternatives to the problem of getting from A to B. People are, I'd say, invariably unfairly critical towards high speed 2. But high speed 2 is doing something dramatic, even though it looks like a substantial investment, because it's also kind of shifting the economic base potentially further north out of London. So that has an impact on the house prices for people that will work, within the economy. It's taking a huge load off of the existing line that is travel. When you travel from London to Birmingham, that line is ever so congested, and yet it services a number of towns and villages and communities across it, which just don't have the capacity. And it could significantly reduce the carbon environmental impact of vehicles on the roads. Whether it's the M1 or the M40, these roads are constantly being trafficked, and if we can start taking some of the vehicular traffic off of that, then vehicles are a terrible polluter, and it's going to take some time for us to go to electric cars. So we need to look at the challenge in a different way. And I'm not for 1 second suggesting that we have to build high-speed railway lines everywhere, but high-speed 2 is trying to solve a number of problems, and it's not just around its capital cost that we need to look at the impacts of it. And so similarly, we can do different proposals for a requirement and get the same outcome, but perhaps doing it completely differently. And I would absolutely welcome new ways of considering things. And going back to where we started, the fact that we're now working from home without substantial pain, achieving the same outcome, rather than have to get on a train, go into an office, have our meeting, and get back on a train and spend 3 hours each commuting. Surely there's a positive there. Unfortunately, I keep filling it with other meetings, but that's by the by. But yeah, I think that definitely, doing the same thing in a different way is a good thing, rather than repeating the same old mistakes, let's say.
But trying to solve the problem, but think about that in a broad perspective to try and get there. Yeah,
we in Autodesk have really focused around the idea of an outcome-based approach to servicing our customers. So, we built these outcome wheels that cover the different requirements of the buildings, infrastructure, and the construction sector. So we then say, what is the outcome that you want? And we can provide some services and technologies to fulfill that. Or we have to work with you to say, well, are you going about this the right way? Because we're uncovering the questions we need to ask in order to service our customers more effectively, because that's probably the best way they'll recognize that maybe the way things have been done so far haven't been optimized. So, it's trying to get, you're striving for perfection. I don't think we'll ever get there, but at least, shifting a few steps forward is a good thing to do, rather than just saying, let's just do it the old way because it was good enough then, it should be good enough now. I think that's unacceptable today.
Well, thanks again for your time. Remember, if you'd like to listen to our earlier conversation, that was called Building Digital Britain. And if you like this podcast, obviously, we've got other ones on a range of transport topics. And don't forget, obviously, that we've also launched a new podcast called Let's Talk Transport. And thank you again. That was an interview with Marek Suchocki from Autodesk.